The pen was already in her hand when I pushed the door open. My grandmother, 79 years old, 102 pounds, sat pinned between two people who were supposed to love her. Her fingers trembled around a thick black ballpoint. Her eyes were wide, pale, and quietly terrified. And the man pressing that pen into her grip was my father. That image, the first thing I saw when I walked into that room. I need you to sit with it for a moment. Because I have spent 15 years of my professional life dismantling financial crimes, forged documents, hidden accounts, fabricated identities. I have seen things that would make your stomach turn. But nothing in any case file ever landed the way that image did. Because that wasn't a client, that was Nora. And she had been waiting 7 weeks for me to come. Let me take you back to where it started. My name is Elena. I am 37 years old. For the past 13 years, my family has understood exactly one thing about me. That I am the quiet disappointment, the one who couldn't hold a job, the one who moved too much, committed to nothing, never showed up to Thanksgiving with anything worth mentioning. I never corrected them, not once, because the truth that I was a senior forensic fraud analyst working for a federal contractor, one of the highest clearance positions in financial crime investigation, available to a civilian, was far more valuable to me hidden than it ever would have been displayed. My cover wasn't an accident. It was a choice. And I maintained it the way I maintained every case. With discipline, patience, and zero room for ego. That quiet arrangement collapsed on a rainy Tuesday in October when my phone vibrated against my desk and I read 5 words from a Nashville area code I hadn't seen in months. Did you water my roses? I set my coffee down and didn't move for 10 seconds. Because those 5 words had nothing to do with roses. 20 years ago, Nora and I had agreed on a phrase. Ordinary, forgettable. The kind of thing a grandmother might text without it raising a single flag. We agreed she would only send it under one specific circumstance. If she was trapped. If her freedom had been removed. If she needed me and couldn't say so directly. We had never used it. Not in 20 years. She had never needed to. Until now. I want to be transparent with you about something before I go further. Because a lot of people watching this might wonder, why didn't she just call the police immediately? And I need you to understand exactly why that was the worst possible first step. Without documented evidence, financial records, physical proof, a documented pattern of exploitation, law enforcement arrives at an elderly woman's home and sees family members providing care. They leave. And then, Victor, my father, panics, goes deeper into lockdown. And Nora becomes permanently unreachable. I had one operational window. One. I was not going to misuse it by moving too fast. 43 minutes after reading that message, I was parked on a quiet street in East Nashville, 2 houses down from the cream-colored ranch home Nora had lived in for 31 years. The exterior told me everything before I even stepped out of the car. Every window shade was pulled down flat. The lavender beds she had maintained every summer, for as long as I could remember, were dead and overgrown weeks of neglect at minimum. And mounted at each corner of the roofline, 4 brand new surveillance cameras. Not old units with dusty lenses. New. Installed with precision overlapping angles, 0 blind spots, covering every inch of the yard perimeter. I ran a wireless traffic analysis on my laptop from the car. The outbound data stream coming from that house was constant and enormous. Those cameras were not recording to a local hard drive inside. They were streaming live video, 24 hours a day, to a remote cloud server. Meaning someone, somewhere, was watching that property in real time from their own device. That is not a caregiver's setup, that is a warden's. I flagged down the mail carrier at the corner. Kept my voice easy, told him I was Nora's granddaughter and hoping to surprise her. He shifted his bag and told me he hadn't seen Nora come to the door himself in months. Her son and his wife signed for everything. They'd explained that she was too unwell to walk to the front porch. 3 months. She had not answered her own door in 3 months. I drove around the block, parked again, and pulled up Nashville's public property records database. Searched the address. There, it was attached to the deed. A recently filed legal application to transfer primary beneficiary rights and legal ownership of the property. Not completed. Still under review. But filed. Actively moving forward. They weren't just isolating her. They were in the middle of a legal seizure. The isolation was the mechanism. The documents were the goal. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly disappear behind a locked door while the people holding the key keep telling you everything is fine, I need you to know that this is for you. That specific helplessness, that quiet, smothered fury, that moment where you realize the person you love cannot speak freely and no one outside the house believes anything is wrong. That is one of the most brutal forms of suffering a person can carry in silence. Elena knew it, and she did what most people can only imagine doing. She got to work. The following Saturday morning, I knocked on that front door holding a casserole dish and wearing the flattest, most harmless expression I owned. Diane, my father's wife, sharply dressed even at 9 in the morning, answered the door and looked at me the way she always had. Like an inconvenience. She began explaining that it was a difficult time, that Nora wasn't feeling well, that visitors weren't helpful right now. And then Victor appeared in the hallway behind her. He glanced past my shoulder toward the street. A quick scan for witnesses. I registered it immediately. He waved Diane aside and said, "Just let her in." Casual. Dismissive. What's she going to do? I tucked that question away like a receipt. The air inside that house was heavy, artificially warm, stale, the kind of closed window warmth that collects when no one has opened a window in weeks. Nora sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, despite the thermostat reading 78. Her reading glasses, she was nearly blind without them, were gone from the side table. The telephone that lived next to her lamp was missing. A glass of water sat untouched on the coffee table. She looked smaller than the last time I'd seen her. Older in a way that didn't come from years. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. And her eyes, just for one fraction of a second, said everything I needed to hear. Recognition. Relief. And the practiced, deliberate calm of someone who had been performing fine for months and was exhausted to the bone. My brother Marcus walked out of the kitchen holding a mug of expensive ground coffee. He looked me up and down slowly, that performative assessment he had been using on me since childhood, and asked, with a practiced smirk, whether I'd lost another job. Victor came and stood beside him, folded his arms. The two of them started into what had clearly become a ritual, cataloging my failures, my cheap jacket, my rented apartment, my complete absence of visible ambition. They were fully absorbed in it, entertained by it. They didn't look at my hands once. I sat beside Nora and placed the casserole on her lap. I fumbled conspicuously with the latch on the thermal carrying bag, gave Victor something to smirk at, which he did, right on schedule. And while Marcus was mid-sentence about something I was already past hearing, I slid my hand beneath the insulated lining at the bottom of the bag and closed my fingers around a fully charged burner phone in a waterproof case. One motion. Practiced. Unhurried. I pressed it into the fold of Nora's blanket. She didn't flinch. Didn't look down. She pressed my hand back. Once, firmly. Acknowledged. Transfer complete. They had absolutely no idea. 3 feet away, while they narrated my failure, I had just given Nora back her voice. Monday morning came in hard. My desk vanished under printed ledgers, subpoenaed bank statements, and 5 years of trust fund records. Felix, my legal partner, the sharpest attorney I've ever worked alongside, arrived just after 7 carrying a sealed court document stamped in red. It was the emergency authorization we'd filed for. Full unrestricted access to every financial transaction, every wire transfer, every legal modification connected to Nora's estate going back 60 months. Everything. No redactions, no limitations. We had it all. We started cross-referencing immediately. Within 20 minutes, the discrepancies were visible and mathematically impossible to explain away. Victor and Diane had submitted a new comprehensive power of attorney to Nora's primary financial institution, a document designed to give them complete, unchallengeable authority over her banking accounts, her investment portfolios, and her property holdings. Felix pulled a verified signature sample from the secure legal archive and placed it next to the submitted document. He pointed at the ink strokes with his pen. "Sophisticated forgery," he said quietly. "The letter formation is close, but the pen pressure on the downstroke doesn't match." She presses harder. "This document doesn't." The signature that was supposed to represent Nora's will had never been made by Nora at all. I pulled up the subpoenaed email records from the bank's communication portal, scanned through recent correspondence, and found it within minutes, a thread between Victor and a local mobile notary service. They had booked an appointment for the following Saturday. The purpose stated in the email was direct: obtaining a signature on the final deed relinquishment form. They planned to sit Nora in front of that document and hold that position until she signed it, however long that took. I looked at Felix and said, "Freeze the accounts." He was already drafting. The temporary protective order went to the bank's fraud prevention department within the hour. Invisible. Silent. Victor and Diane would have no awareness of its existence until the moment they reached for the money. Every major outgoing transaction blocked. Every title transfer attempt declined. Every new credit authorization suspended. We had locked them inside a financial cage of our own construction, and they would walk into Saturday believing they had all the power in the world, while the cage door was already closed. That Wednesday evening, I sat across from my best friend Simone at a coffee shop on the east side of the city, barely touching my drink. She knew, without asking, by the specific stillness in my posture, the controlled kind that means something enormous is being held back. I want to be honest with you. I was barely holding myself together that night. 13 years of being dismissed, written off, talked over and around, and now knowing exactly what that family was doing to the one person in that house who had ever genuinely looked at me, it was almost unbearable. The urge to drive straight to that house and blow every door open was physical. It had weight. And Simone, who has known me long enough to recognize the exact shape of that specific tension, told me something I needed to hear. She said, "You have been waiting for this for a long time. Don't let one bad night ruin a perfect case." And then the encrypted app on my phone buzzed against the table. I pressed it to my ear. The voice that came through quiet, careful, and unmistakably steady was Nora's. "They think I've lost my mind," she said, and there was something almost fierce in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. "They're about to find out how wrong they are." She had used the burner phone to connect via secure video link with a court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist, an independent evaluation arranged through our legal team. The assessment was complete. The formal medical conclusion: Nora was fully lucid, entirely capable of independent decision-making, suffering not from cognitive decline, but from deliberate physical isolation and systematic emotional manipulation. That signed, certified document destroyed Victor's entire legal strategy in a single page. His guardianship claim required proving her incapacity. He no longer had any ground left to stand on. While Nora and I were still on the phone, a secondary alert lit up my laptop screen. The bank's automated security system had flagged a high-value declined transaction. Diane had attempted to purchase 2 first-class tickets to Europe on Nora's primary credit account. The terminal had declined the card. The protective order had engaged exactly as designed. Diane was standing at an airport ticket counter somewhere with a card that would never work again, completely unaware that it was over. That the structure they had spent months building had been methodically dismantled from the outside while they watched the inside. I called the emergency coordinator at the state's Adult Protective Services office and walked him through the full picture: the isolation, the forged documents, the financial exploitation, the imminent, forced signing. Together, we built a joint intervention scheduled to the minute for Saturday morning. I gave him the architectural layout of the property, the exact positions of the surveillance cameras, the entry points, the interior layout. This operation was going to be precise. It was going to leave nothing to improvise. Saturday morning arrived. I want you to slow down with me here, because some moments deserve to be experienced at their full speed, which is slow. I stood at the front door of that cream-colored house with Felix behind me and 2 uniformed officers flanking both sides. I could hear Victor's voice through the door before I touched the handle. Sharp. Pressured. Repeating something. The voice of a man who believes with complete certainty that no one is watching. I pushed the door open. The room came into view all at once. Victor on one side of the couch, Diane on the other, both of them pressed against Nora's shoulders, their bodies forming walls she couldn't move through. A stack of transfer documents sat on the coffee table. A notary's embosser sat open beside them. Victor had a thick black pen in his hand, and he was in the middle of demanding something, his voice cutting, insistent, the way it always was when he wanted compliance and wasn't getting it. Then he saw me. The sentence he was speaking stopped at the middle of a word. I didn't slow down. I walked straight through the center of that room, projecting the kind of authority that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need to. The badge clipped to my blazer, the one I had hidden for 13 years while they mocked my jacket, caught the light as I moved. Behind me, Felix with a folder of executed court warrants, 2 officers, an APS coordinator, and a notary who had walked into a situation he was entirely unprepared for, his face going gray as the warrants and badges and the full weight of what he had nearly participated in registered behind his eyes. "Put the pen down," I said. The voice that came out of me was level. Not cold, not theatrical. Just settled. 13 years of being quietly underestimated, giving me a stillness I had earned. Victor didn't move at first, and that single second of frozen disbelief, that pause before reality reorganized itself for him, was the moment I will carry for the rest of my life. Because in that pause I watched something collapse. Not guilt. Victor was not built for guilt. What collapsed was the version of the world he had been operating inside, the one where he was clever enough, invisible enough, and entitled enough to pull this off without consequence. It broke apart in real time, standing in his mother's living room, in front of his daughter he had always considered harmless. The notary stepped back immediately and raised both hands. "I had no idea," he said, voice shaking. "They told me this was a standard signing appointment." Felix handed him a copy of the protective order and advised him to contact legal counsel. Marcus had been sitting in the armchair across the room, holding a glass of water, watching the whole thing the way he always watched everything, with that baseline assumption that whatever was happening would eventually benefit him, or at least not involve him. When I walked in, his eyes went to the badge, then to the officers, then back to the badge. I watched the arithmetic run across his face, years of mockery recalibrating in real time against the reality of what he was looking at. His sister. The one he had written off so completely, and so consistently. Standing in the center of a coordinated enforcement operation she had built from scratch. The glass slipped from his fingers. Water and ice spread across the floor in a slow, spreading arc. He didn't say a single word. The officers separated Victor and Diane from Nora cleanly and firmly. I walked through the cleared space and sat next to her on the couch. I took the pen from between her fingers. She was still holding it. She looked up at me and exhaled a breath that had been accumulating for months. She didn't cry. She didn't need to say anything. She just let her shoulders come down for the first time in a long time. She was out. It was over. Victor, being guided toward the door, began to shout. He called me ungrateful. He said the estate was rightfully his. He threw every accusation left in his inventory, because it was all he had remaining. I looked at him once clearly, without heat, without any of the anger I had once been afraid would make me unsteady. "You counted on my silence," I told him. "That was your mistake." That afternoon, in an interrogation room that smelled like burnt coffee and old linoleum, Victor gave 3 versions of his story in 45 minutes. The forensic bank statements sat in a binder on the table in front of him. The certified handwriting analysis sat on top. Page 3 of the analysis showed in technical, clinical, courtroom-ready language that the power of attorney signature was not Nora's. When the detective placed that page in front of Diane, the last of her composure left her face. In an adjacent room, Marcus was making calculations. The calculation he arrived at quickly, and without visible remorse, was that cooperation was cheaper than exposure. He gave a full sworn statement. Names, dates, sequence of events, everything. He threw Victor and Diane into the deepest part of this without a second's hesitation. I watched through the one-way glass and felt nothing generous toward him. Not rage that had burned off long before, just a clear, settled recognition of who he had always been. Felix formally submitted the documents Nora had signed that morning, in the presence of a legitimate notary and 2 legal witnesses, to the court. Victor was permanently removed from the trust. His name was erased from the will. A standing protective order was filed, legally barring Marcus from coming within 100 yards of Nora's home. The estate was returned to her sole protected control, where it had always belonged. 3 months later, I watched Nora water her plants on the balcony of the new secured apartment we had chosen together. She had fresh lavender in a clay pot she'd picked out herself. She was wearing her reading glasses. Her phone sat on the side table where she'd left it. The windows were open. She could walk to the door if she wanted. She could answer her own mail. She was just a person, living inside her own life, in the unmonitored, unrushed way she had always deserved. What this story taught me, and I have turned it over many times since that Saturday, is that concealment and weakness are not the same thing. For 13 years, I gave my family exactly what they expected to see, and that ordinary, forgettable image was the most powerful protection I ever built. The mistake most people make when they are underestimated is the urgent need to correct it immediately. But there are situations where letting people believe the wrong thing about you is the sharpest instrument available. Not forever. Not as a permanent identity, but long enough and patiently enough to do what needs to be done without interference, without scrutiny, without anyone trying to stop you. And the second thing this story taught me, the people who love us quietly are often doing more than the ones who announce it. Nora had protected me in 100 small, invisible ways across my entire childhood. The distress code we made 20 years ago was both of us, together, agreeing that we would never stop protecting each other. When the moment came, neither of us did. If you are watching this and something about it felt familiar, if there is someone in your life who has slowly stopped answering their own door, who sounds a little too careful when they speak, whose mail is now signed for by someone else, please don't dismiss that instinct. Isolation is the first tool of financial abuse. It is quiet and it is patient, and it looks like caregiving from the outside. Trust what you're sensing. Before we close, drop a number in the comments right now. Type 1 if you think Elena was right to stay hidden for all those years and use her cover as a strategic shield. Type 2 if you think she should have revealed herself earlier and fought openly. Type 3 if you have been through something like this with your own family, with someone you love, and you want the people in these comments to know they are not alone. Also, where in the world are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? I want to know. The people who find stories like this one don't stumble across them by accident. If this story reached something real in you, hit subscribe. We share stories like this every single week, people who were counted out, who stayed quiet long enough to win, who protected what mattered most when no one was watching. You don't want to miss what's coming next. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined, set in Nashville, Tennessee, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, institutions, or events is entirely coincidental.